Rain tapped the tall windows before dawn reached the square. The wood in my courtroom held the smell of wet coats and old fear. Some mornings feel heavier than the robe on my shoulders. That morning felt like a warning I could not yet name. If you know what it means to carry pain in silence, stay with me a little while. I want to tell you about a morning I still hear in my sleep. Some stories do not ask for applause. They ask for one heart that will not look away. My name is Judge Elena Morris, and I had served 34 years by then, long enough to know anger when it entered a room, long enough to know grief before it spoke. That day, grief reached the courthouse first. The sky outside looked bruised, low, and tired. Cold rain slid down the glass in crooked lines. People entered with collars up, shoes dark with water, and voices kept low. Even the hallway sounded as if it did not want to disturb anyone. My clerk placed the next file beside my hand. The folder was soft at the corners from too much handling. On top sat a demand for $18,436.52. Tall weeds, peeling paint, broken railing, and months of missed appearances. I have seen murder files thinner than that one. This one was thick with notices, photos, and fee slips. Every page said the same cold thing in a different voice. The owner had ignored the city for too long. On paper, it looked simple. An old house gone bad, a stubborn owner refusing to fix what everyone else could plainly see, a person who had stopped answering the world. But paper likes clean stories, and real life rarely stays clean. I have learned to distrust any file that sounds too certain. When records feel too tidy, pain is usually hiding somewhere nearby. So I looked at the courtroom door and waited. When the bailiff called the name, the room turned as one. What came through that doorway was not defiance. It was a woman so small she seemed made of folded linen. Yet she carried a weight the room could feel at once. She moved with short steps that ended before each one felt safe. Her brown coat hung loose at the shoulders and shiny at the cuffs. One button near the throat was missing, and the cloth had gone thin. Below it, a washed-out blue dress brushed against her calves. Her shoes were black house slippers, the soft kind worn near a bed. Rain had darkened the edges where they met the floor. She had likely worn them because tying laces hurt or bending did. No one who plans for public judgment wears slippers by choice. Her hands were what caught me first. They were thin as paper over the bones, red around the knuckles, and trembling. She held a cracked vinyl purse against her chest with both hands, not like a handbag, like a person holding shut a door. Then I saw her eyes. They were a pale gray, washed almost colorless by age and bad sleep, but they were not empty. They had the stunned watchfulness of someone who has lived too long beside worry. She did not look around the room. She did not search for sympathy in the benches. She lifted her face and looked straight at me, not with trust, with effort. At the city table stood Assistant Prosecutor Daniel Reeves. He was clean, pressed, orderly, and careful in every motion. He was not cruel, and that mattered, but he believed records were safer than feelings, and he showed it. His files were tabbed in bright colors. His tie was straight, his shoes polished, his notes lined in exact blocks. He spoke the way men speak when they do not expect surprise, measured, polite, and protected by procedure. Mr. Reeves rose and began the city's argument. 9 inspections across 29 months, 7 posted notices, 3 mailed warnings, and unpaid fines climbing each cycle. A pending request to place a claim against the home itself. He clicked through photographs on the screen, grass above the porch step, paint peeling from the frames, a front railing cracked near the middle post, black bags stacked beside a leaning shed. He spoke of public safety, neighborhood standards, and repeated non-compliance. Then he used the word that changed the air in my chest. He said the homeowner had shown a pattern of disregard. Some words arrived dressed like facts, but carry judgment underneath. I looked again at the woman in the slippers. Nothing in her body said disregard. Everything in her body said distance, strain, and private exhaustion. So I leaned forward and spoke as gently as I could. "Ma'am," I said, "my name is Judge Elena Morris. Take your time with me. Tell me your name first, and then we will go one step at a time. You do not have to race the room." She swallowed before speaking. The effort moved all the way down her neck. "Lillian Bennett," she said. Then, after a pause, "Mrs. Bennett is fine, Your Honor." Her voice was soft, rough at the edges, and almost wind-burned. the kind of voice you hear after years of talking quietly in one house. I asked whether she had received the notices from the city. She nodded once, small but honest. Then I asked the question the file had skipped. Why did you not come to court before today? Her fingers tightened around the purse handle until the skin went white. For a moment, I thought the answer might break loose and disappear. I want to ask you something before I tell you what she said. Have you ever looked at someone and known the truth was bigger than the charge? Have you ever felt a room holding its breath before a stranger speaks? That is what it felt like then. Mrs. Bennett said she had not really left her house in 3 years. Not properly, not alone, and not farther than the porch unless she had no choice. 3 years earlier, she had fallen in her kitchen and damaged her hip. She healed enough to stand, but never enough to move with confidence. Inside the house, she used walls and chair backs for balance. Outside, she needed a cane and time. The bus stop sat 3 blocks away over broken pavement and sloped curbs. Her doctor had told her not to travel alone if she could avoid it. I asked whether anyone lived with her. That answer came slower. My son Arthur, she said. Then she corrected herself in a whisper. He did. The room changed. Right there. No gasp, no noise, just a quiet understanding moving from bench to bench. Mr. Reeves lowered his eyes to his notes for the first time. Even he could feel the shape of that small past tense. Arthur Bennett was 63. He had weak lungs from birth and growing trouble with his muscles. By the end, he needed help turning in bed, bathing, eating, and breathing at night. Mrs. Bennett had cared for him at home for decades. She said the yard got bad after one wet spring. Then the porch rail split during a hard freeze. She kept meaning to ask for help, but each day got eaten by the next problem. Arthur's breathing worsened and small repairs drifted out of reach. I asked whether she had family nearby. A niece in another state, she said, but not close enough to come often. A church woman used to bring soup on Tuesdays. A nurse had come for a while until insurance changed. That was the first revelation. It was sad, but still within the shape of what people expect. An old woman, a bad hip, a sick son, and a house slipping slowly. Then I asked what happened after the notices began. She opened her purse and took out a folded photograph. Her hand shook so hard my clerk half rose, then stopped. In the picture, Arthur sat by a window with a blanket over his knees. He was smiling at someone outside the frame. Was this recent, I asked? She nodded and looked down. Last fall, she said, 3 weeks before he passed. That sentence landed with more force than anything before it. The first city inspection matched the month Arthur came home from the hospital again. Mrs. Bennett had the discharge paper folded in fourths inside her purse. The corners were nearly gone from being opened so often. The dates lined up exactly with the city's earliest photographs. Arthur came home with an oxygen machine, a rolling table, extra tubing, and bed rails. Mrs. Bennett moved her own chair into his room. She stopped sleeping through the night. She learned to wake at certain sounds before they fully started. She learned which cough meant turn him now, which pause meant call the nurse line, which blew around the lips meant sit him up and wait beside him. Her world shrank to one room and one pair of lungs. She ate standing near his bed. She washed clothes and short loads she could lift. When she did step outside, it was to bring in medicine or meet an ambulance. Grass can grow very high while a person is saving someone else. Then came the second revelation. I asked how often she slept in her own room during those months. She looked confused by the question, as if sleep itself had become a luxury. Not much, she said. Maybe not at all near the end. Mrs. Bennett said Arthur was terrified of dying in a facility. He had spent too much of childhood inside hospital walls. So years earlier, she had made him a promise, no matter how hard it got, he would stay in his own room. He would hear the same clock, she said. He would look at the same curtain in the morning. He would know the smell of his own house when he woke from pain. That promise became the frame of everything she did. She learned medicines by shape, cap color, and bottle weight. She learned how to change sheets with a man still lying there. She learned how to pray without stopping her hands. And she learned what part of herself could be ignored when time was short. Around this point, the room stopped seeing an old property owner. It started seeing a private war that had gone on without witnesses, but I still had to ask one more question, the hardest one. When did your son die, Mrs. Bennett? She did not answer with words first. Her mouth opened, closed, and failed to settle. Then she pressed the photograph flat against her chest. "72 days ago," she said, "the ambulance came before dawn. They covered him with the brown blanket because bright lights upset him. I remember that blanket more than I remember my own name." No one moved. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a heartbeat. Mrs. Bennett stared at the far wall and kept going because stopping would have drowned her. That was the third revelation, and it broke the room open. She said the last time she went past the gate before today was behind Arthur's stretcher. The porch light was still on. One slipper got wet in the grass. She remembered that because it was the only thing her mind could hold. After he died, she left the front curtains half open because Arthur liked morning light. She kept his water cup by the sink for 2 weeks. She sat in the chair beside his bed long after the bed was empty. She could not make herself move the blanket. The notices kept coming. She saw them clipped to the gate or tucked under the door. But to reach them, she had to take the cracked steps alone. Most days, she simply could not make herself do it. Then came the letter saying the city might move against the house. The same house where Arthur had come home from the hospital as a baby. The same house where he had taken his last breath as an old man. It is hard to explain what a threat means when a house also holds a grave of memory. I set my pen down and turned to Mr. Reeves. "Counsel," I said, "did any inspector ever knock on the door?" He checked his notes once, then again. "No recorded contact attempt, Your Honor." "Did anyone ask whether the resident was elderly, disabled, or unable to travel?" He turned another page. "No, Your Honor. Exterior observations were sufficient under policy." That word, sufficient, can do a lot of damage in the wrong hands. I asked for the inspection photos to be shown again. This time, I wanted the room to slow down and really look. In the first image, near the front window, sat 2 oxygen cylinder boxes. No one from the city had mentioned them. In the next image, a folded walker leaned beside the porch wall. A delivery package marked medical supplies sat near the door. A narrow path cut through the grass from the step to the mailbox. It was the path of one pair of careful feet. My clerk then found something else in Mrs. Bennett's papers. It was a home health certification signed by her doctor. Across the top were the words "homebound due to mobility limits." The date matched 4 of the city inspections. The air in that room shifted again. This was not a homeowner refusing to engage. This was a woman medically described as unable to leave home safely, and the city had charged her for not acting healthy. I asked whether any accommodation had been offered. That means a fair adjustment when health or age blocks normal steps. Mr. Reeves said none had been requested in writing. Mrs. Bennett gave a sad little smile at that. She said she did not know the word accommodation. She did not know which office handled such things. She knew how to stop a nosebleed, lift a shoulder, and untangle oxygen tubing. Those were the skills her life had required. Then the bailiff brought forward a flash drive from her purse. Her neighbor had loaded it for her the night before. It held doorbell video from across the street, time-stamped, plain, and impossible to charm away. We watched the first clip in silence. A delivery van stopped outside the house at dusk. 2 men carried oxygen refills to the porch while Mrs. Bennett opened the door only a few inches. She waved from inside because she could not safely step down. The second clip showed paramedics guiding Arthur back into the house. One held the tubing high. Mrs. Bennett followed with one hand on the broken rail and one on the doorframe. She looked smaller than the stretcher they had just moved. Another clip showed her collecting a paper from the gate. It took her nearly a full minute to return to the porch. Each step looked chosen, tested, and paid for. By the top, she leaned against the wall before going inside. "If you are feeling angry now, good. Some anger is clean. Some anger means your heart is still working the way it should. And what came next mattered even more." Mr. Reeves removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. He was buying himself a few honest seconds. The numbers in his file had not prepared him for a frail woman shepherding oxygen tubing in house slippers. Numbers rarely prepare anyone for love worn down by labor. Still, he made one final defense. He said the city could not stop enforcement each time hardship appeared. Standards had to hold, or every violation would arrive wrapped in a tragic story. He was arguing for the wall that keeps systems from collapsing. I understood the concern, but walls do not excuse blindness. A sad story is not a defense, I told him. A documented reality is something else entirely. This woman was certified homebound. Your own photos show medical equipment at the door. Your notices were left where she could barely reach them, and every missed response became another charge against her body. The law is not meant to grind the weak because they move slowly. It is meant to protect order without abandoning mercy. When facts reveal suffering so plain a child could see it, fairness must adjust. Anything less is failure dressed as discipline. He began to say the property still needed correction. I raised a hand and answered before the sentence could harden. Yes, I said, the railing still needs repair. But punishment is not repair, and debt is not a hammer that builds anything. Then I told the room what I believed. When government sees signs of deep illness and answers only with growing fees, it has mistaken power for purpose. No one had knocked, asked, checked, or paused. The system had spoken many times, but it had never once listened. That silenced the argument because there was nothing honest left to add. Rain tapped the windows again. Mrs. Bennet sat very still, as if the room might break apart if she breathed too hard. I picked up my gavel. Mrs. Bennet, I said, I am ready to rule. Her shoulders drew inward at once. Mr. Reeves faced forward with the stiff calm of a man awaiting correction. The whole courtroom seemed to lean toward the bench. The late fees are vacated. I let that sentence stand alone for a breath. Every penalty tied to missed appearances is vacated. Gavel. The city's request to place a claim against your home is denied. Another breath. The remaining fines are dismissed in the interest of justice and basic fairness. Gavel. The safety problems at the property are real, and they will be addressed, but they will not be addressed by burying you under debt. I am ordering a 90-day repair plan with city assistance and senior services support. Gavel. For the first time that morning, Mrs. Bennet looked uncertain in a different way, as if she had prepared herself for pain and no longer knew where to set it down. She looked at her purse, opened it, closed it, and pressed both hands over the clasp. Then her shoulders lowered no more than an inch. That inch said everything. A person can carry fear so long it begins to look like posture. Relief does not always arrive as tears. Sometimes it arrives as a body remembering gravity has changed. Her mouth moved once before sound came. Thank you, she whispered. But the words were almost too small to hear. She did not cry. She looked like someone who had forgotten crying was allowed. I should have moved to the next matter. Instead, I heard myself ask a question no form requires. What was your son's full name, Mrs. Bennet? She looked up with startled eyes. Arthur James Bennet, she said, so I repeated it into the room, not for procedure, not for paperwork, for him and for the life that had filled that house. Then I asked my clerk to take Mrs. Bennet downstairs after court, not to the payment window, to the social worker, the transportation office, and the benefits desk. I wanted appointments made before she left the building. I asked if she had enough food for the week. She hesitated, which told me more than a speech could have. So I had the bailiff bring the emergency resource packet we keep behind the bench. Sometimes humanity fits inside a plain manila folder. Before I could call the next matter, a voice rose from the back row. It belonged to Rosa Alvarez, the neighbor from the video across the street. She stood with both hands over a shopping bag and asked if she might speak. I told her she could. Rosa said Mrs. Bennet had once watched neighborhood children from that same porch every summer. She kept bandages, safety pins, and popsicles in a little freezer that rattled when it ran. Any child with a scraped knee ended up at her steps. Any lonely child ended up with a cookie and a place to sit. Then Rosa told us something small that mattered more than it should have. Even after Arthur got so sick, Mrs. Bennet mailed $3 each winter to the animal shelter. Not much, Rosa said, but kind people keep giving even when life is taking. The room understood exactly what she meant. If this story is touching some quiet place in you, listen to that feeling. There are people around us who disappear without ever leaving home. They do not need pity nearly as much as they need witness. And witness can change what happens next. 2 weeks later, I learned the story had left the courthouse. A local reporter requested the transcript and wrote about the hearing. Then a church bulletin reprinted part of it. After that, a morning radio host read the ruling out loud. The clerk's office began receiving envelopes in stacks. By the end of 12 days, there were 143 letters addressed to Mrs. Bennet. There were 28 grocery cards, 11 pharmacy vouchers, and handwritten notes folded around cash. One child mailed a drawing of a yellow porch with flowers. A retired carpenter named Neil offered to rebuild the front rail for free. A roofing crew promised to patch the shed before winter weather returned. A hardware store donated paint, brushes, and primer worth $612. A local pharmacy arranged free home delivery for her medicine. Someone started an online fundraiser without asking anyone in court. It reached $19,308 in less than 2 weeks. That money paid old utility debt, safer steps, and a proper handrail at both sides. It also bought a new mattress because hers had given out years earlier. Senior services moved faster than I had seen in a very long time. A case manager visited by Friday. Meals were scheduled 3 days each week, then 5 after another review. A volunteer crew cleared the yard, hauled the broken boards, and cut back the weeds. Even the city shifted. The same inspector returned, but this time with a repair coordinator beside him. He later wrote me a note saying the house smelled like cinnamon dust and old medicine. He said he had not understood what he was looking at the first time. 6 months passed before I saw Mrs. Bennett again. It was another gray morning, though warmer and softer at the edges. I had just finished a line of traffic matters when my clerk smiled toward the door. "Someone is here to see you," she said. Mrs. Bennett entered wearing brown walking shoes with tidy laces and thick soles. Her coat was light green and sat properly on her shoulders. Her hair had been trimmed into a smooth silver curve around her jaw. The old purse was still there, but now it hung from one arm. The first time I saw her, she seemed braced against the whole world. Now she stood upright, still careful, but no longer folded inward. The shadows beneath her eyes had lightened. Her face no longer looked trapped by constant strain. Her hands were still thin, still marked by years of work, but the knuckles were less red, and they no longer gripped for dear life. One hand rested calmly on a cane with a carved wooden handle. The other lifted in a small wave when our eyes met. Her eyes had changed most of all. Months earlier, they held only survival. Now they moved around the courtroom with steady interest before returning to me. There was room in them now, room for weather, people, and future days. She had brought a young man named Luis from the senior center. He worked part-time as an aide and part-time as a driver. Mrs. Bennett said he fussed too much over seatbelts and lunch hours. Luis smiled and said she fussed back just as hard. Then she lifted a round tin from her bag. Inside were lemon cookies dusted with sugar. I cannot accept gifts of value, of course, but I could accept a shared moment. So I asked the bailiff to place the tin in the staff room for everyone. Mrs. Bennett told me she sits on her porch again most mornings. At first, she said, it was only 5 minutes, then 10, then long enough to wave at the school bus on the corner. Now she keeps a small plant by the rail Arthur never got to see repaired. Rosa's granddaughter visits every Thursday to read aloud. Mrs. Bennett has joined a church lunch twice a month. Meals still arrive, though she now freezes some for later. She says the freezer still rattles, and she hopes it always will. Then she told me about Arthur's room. She repainted the walls a quiet cream color, but kept his brass clock on the shelf. It still ticks too loudly at night, she said, but now the sound feels like company instead of warning. There was one detail she shared that I will keep forever. The day the repaired gate swung open without sticking, she stepped onto the sidewalk alone, only to the mailbox and back, but still alone. She carried Arthur's photo in her coat pocket the whole way. Before I leave you with what I learned, I want to ask something plain. Who near you has gone quiet lately? Who has not been seen because life got too heavy to cross the porch? Would you notice before the next notice did? That evening, after the last file was closed and the building settled, I sat alone behind the bench. The rain had stopped. The flag outside hung still for once. My courtroom sounded like old wood easing itself into silence. People think this job is mostly about deciding guilt and innocence. Sometimes it is, but more often it is about searching for the human truth trapped beneath bad paperwork. That truth rarely arrives speaking clearly for itself. Sometimes it comes in slippers on a rainy morning. Sometimes it smells like dust, cold air, and medicine. Sometimes it carries a bent photograph and waits to learn whether anyone will ask the right question. That is when the law faces its real test. Not when the facts are easy, not when everyone in the room agrees. The real test comes when a rule can be followed perfectly and still crush something sacred beneath it. That is where conscience must step in. I have sentenced people who hurt others without remorse. I have seen lies told with dry eyes and steady voices. I have also seen decent people disappear behind curtains while the world kept mailing them demands. That may be the colder thing. That is why I still listen for what the paper missed. That is why I ask one more question when something feels wrong. And that is why I said Arthur James Bennett's name out loud in my courtroom. Some names deserve to remain in the air a little longer. Justice is not a machine holding a stamp. It is a choice people make, one difficult moment at a time. A choice to see fully. A choice to refuse easy cruelty when compassion asks more of us. If we stop making that choice, the law becomes only weight. If we keep making it, even imperfectly, then a courtroom can become a place where someone is returned to the world. I have seen that happen, and I will never forget it. Some doors open with keys, some open because one person finally says, "I see you." That morning, an old woman walked into my courtroom carrying 3 years of silence. She did not leave carrying it alone. That is enough to keep a judge going through many dark mornings. That is enough to remind me why mercy must stay close to power. And that is enough to believe this work can still mean something, even now.